Best friends that anyone could have. Taylor Zarzour joining us here for the final hour. Chris Doring, the governor, and myself, Peter Burns. Follow us on Twitter. Taylor does not have a Twitter account.
No.
Too many people were yelling at him, my friend. No, not so much.
I just feel like you can't win. So why participate in something you can't win?
Listen, if you go, you can get a head coaching job like Lane Kiffin did because of Twitter. We'll get into that in a little bit, but let's go ahead and get into a little SEC scoreboard because, my goodness, it was a good one in Atlanta. SEC championship game, and, of course, 37-10 all Tigers. What'd you take from it?
I just took that LSU is clearly the best team in the Southeastern Conference, and it's a shame all year long we've been sitting here on Monday mornings talking about Georgia's offensive issues, and I felt like they showed up more than we ever would have wanted. I wanted to see a game that went down to the wire in the fourth quarter. CD, we didn't get it. We've seen it a lot in the SEC championship game in recent years. This, unfortunately, in the second half, you're talking blowout material because of the way that Georgia offense was sputtering throughout the game. You had a lot of drop passes, so I think that certainly you could have seen more of like a 17-point game instead of a 27-point game, but it wasn't a fair fight.
Yeah, the storyline all year long was the receiver position, how they were going to fill the void of those 5 top receivers from last year. They've never been able to do that this year, and something that you didn't see much evolution or improvement. In fact, I think you felt some regression, in fact, from that entire offense. I want to get in. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about LSU, but I want to ask you about Georgia when we go to that side.
Yeah, and speaking of Georgia, before we get into that, I want to hear from Kirby Smart. I thought some intriguing comments he had post-game after the SEC championship.
First of all, I've been in this league for a long time, and I don't know that I've seen the combination of things they've got. Okay, they've got an elite quarterback that's a really good athlete. All right, they have a back that is a matchup guy. He can match up on anybody and go win. They've got really good wideouts, and they've got experience at the offensive line. So they go tempo, but they don't go tempo to just run the ball. They go tempo and take shots. They never change personnel. They play 28 consecutive snaps with the same people on the field. So it does not allow you to substitute in the pattern that you want to. So there's a combination of a lot of things, and it is scheme-oriented, but it's a lot more than scheme. I mean, they have plays that they've run all year that we've run all year. Our plays haven't looked like their plays because a lot of times we may not have the same guys doing those plays. And they got a great group of wideouts combined with an extremely athletic quarterback, and it's hit at the right time. So I got a lot of respect for what they're doing and who they're doing it with. They're hard to defend.
TZ, that's high praise right there, coming from a guy that's been in this league for a long time. As he said, a guy that really knows defenses and matching up against good teams. My question has to do with Georgia, though. They had some key injuries. Things didn't go their way. But did Georgia miss their window? Is this going to be viewed as a down season? They go, 11-2, and nobody in Athens is happy. Is the bar set too high at this point in time, or did they miss their window of opportunity?
I wonder that same question because a lot of people that are closer to the program than I am, Matt Stinchcomb, for example, who's still very close to the program, my partner on games throughout the season, he thought going into this is our year. Mm-hmm. This is the year that Georgia has a chance to win the national championship. The defense, I thought, was improved from last year. Pass rush was so much better, one of the best in college football. The offensive line was mature. You've got some guys that'll be in the NFL next year. You put that combination together, and yeah, I thought that this was Georgia's chance. I don't want to say the window is closing because Kirby Smart is recruiting so well. Losing Sam Pittman's a blow. I mean, that guy's a fantastic recruiter on the offensive line. The biggest concern I have is Jake Fromm regressed this year. He was
zeroed out.
His mechanics were bad. Even in the game on Saturday, he was missing receivers, throwing behind them consistently, and that's what was surprising to me. We all love Jake Fromm as a human being and think he's a great leader, but in the last 2 months, I don't know if it's a disconnect with James Coley, the offensive coordinator, or simply this guy is in a rut. No matter who the play caller is, he's just simply in a rut. But they've got to get that fixed if Georgia's going to compete to get to the college football playoff again next year. Kirby Smart's 100% right with everything he said about LSU, by the way. I still thought Georgia played a pretty good defensive game.
Well, they kept it in it, right?
Compared to the way that LSU made other defenses look all season, I thought that they did a pretty good job on Saturday. But when your offense against an average defense, LSU's defense is average by SEC standards, Georgia's offense is the problem. It's not as much LSU's offense. It was more Georgia's inability to get things done on offense, I thought.
A mixture of both, but I think you nailed it when you said the window's not closing because of how good Georgia continues to recruit. And I go back and look at the team that they faced in the SEC championship game. LSU was pretty good last year, right? And all of a sudden, boom, they flipped the switch. Joe Brady comes in there. They're able to find it, and they had a quarterback that was able to put them in spots, and Joe Burrow, of course, going to win the Heisman. So if it can be that simple where it's a one-year fix, absolutely Georgia is still, I think, the cream of the crop. As much as I know you like Florida, give me all the money I can put on Georgia still being there year in and year out, because I think Kirby is able to get it figured out.
Well, I would say they're the best team still in the East, PB, but I think that it's going to be more difficult. I think the East is about to get significantly better. Look at what Tennessee's done in the last couple of months. Look, as CD has been saying about Florida, this Florida football team is only going to get better, and through transition, they're making the New Year's Six, Dan Mullen's first 2 seasons. So I think those 2 programs right there are going to be a bigger thorn in Georgia's side, but I do still think that Georgia's overall talent is better than those other programs.
All right, let's turn the page right now. Some other bowl games were announced yesterday. Bowl games are so interesting because we don't know which ones are most grateful for being there, who's going to play on those rosters. But as you look at it, is there a team that is in a sense of urgency mode that needs
There's a
to
no
win?
doubter. By the way, there's a no doubt answer here. I'm not going to preface the question, all right, or bias the question. There's a no doubter here.
There's a no doubt answer to
There's a no
CD's
doubt
question.
Which one needs this the most?
Well, I think Alabama needs to beat Michigan. I think Alabama needs their mojo back.
You have to do this
getting to play Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines. Is that a little shimmy? Is that a little shake?
Because that's what I'm glad. Great minds think alike.
Well, for a couple things. Does anyone in the free world outside that committee room believe that Alabama's the 13th best team in college football?
It's absolutely laughable.
What?
Absolutely
we don't
laughable.
say this often, but the SEC got screwed here in this situation. I mean, you look at where Florida was ranked, where Alabama's ranked. Auburn. To me, if you want to talk about head-to-head, I know they don't do it this way.
If they're going to contrive the rankings to get Alabama to play Michigan, then sign me up. I mean, but the only thing that concerns me, though, Peter, is Jim Harbaugh going to be coaching the Michigan Wolverines on January the 1st? There are people in this town
that think that he might be the Charlotte Panthers.
David Tepper, the owner of the Carolina Panthers, wants Jim Harbaugh to be his next head coach. So I would look hard at that job if I'm Harbaugh. I don't know that he's ever going to be better than Ohio State. It's extremely difficult to recruit against the Buckeyes. In the NFL, in my opinion, Chris, it's easier to win because there's more parity with the players.
Free agency.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You don't have to go out and recruit. And Harbaugh's done a good job of recruiting, but he is nowhere close to the skill players that Ohio State does, meaning is he ever going to beat them? Yeah. This might be a great opportunity for him to have Christian McCaffrey here in Charlotte. So I'm not 100% sure it's going to be Saban versus Harbaugh, but if it is, absolutely. It reminds me of the last time Alabama played in the Citrus Bowl when they stole Michigan State's manhood.
49-7, I believe, right?
Yeah.
2010?
McElroy's out pounding people, blocking in the open field some 9 years ago. I have a feeling that Alabama is not going to overlook this bowl game, as they've done a couple of times in the past.
And to think about it, right? So much is on the line for Nick Saban because they don't want to hear this, the dynasty is over. And I don't necessarily buy into that. But I do buy into the fact that the last 3 top 25 opponents they have faced, they're 0-3. This is the time. You don't want to go 0-4, especially to a Michigan team, which a lot of Alabama fans are like, your little Michigan Wolverines, an important victory. I'm glad you were right on that. I want to get your thoughts on the coaching changes, but we're going to do that next segment. Okay. But I want to stay with the bowl games as well. Georgia, what do you expect to see from them in their bowl game in the Sugar Bowl against Baylor?
Yeah, I mean, and last year I don't think that Georgia was that thrilled to be in the Sugar Bowl. And clearly, I know a lot of other conferences get mad about this when you say, the SEC teams don't show up for the bowl games. Well, on the flip side of the equation, the Michigan Wolverines shut it down last year against Florida. Yeah. So I think it goes both ways here. I would be surprised if Georgia doesn't put a lot more into this Sugar Bowl than they did last year. Not so dissimilar to what we just talked about with Alabama. Georgia, especially with Jake Fromm, this guy needs to have a good performance going into the offseason. So I would expect Georgia to throw maybe not their best punch, but close to their best punch.
I agree they're going to want to have a sense of urgency about themselves to win this game, particularly after losing the way they did against LSU and their performance last year against Texas. But I just look at the roster and how banged up they are. I mean, and does DeAndre Swift even play in this football game? Do you have Cager come back? What's the, losing Blaylock now? I mean, they're just so incredibly banged up at this point in time. I don't know if they can get it going one more time this year. But with that being said, which team benefits the most from the additional 15 practices, the opportunity
Great question.
To get ready for the 2020 season?
I think it's the Tennessee Volunteers, and there was some drama, I guess, yesterday with how these bowls were assigned.
Thought they were going to Nashville for Music City. Is that correct?
Yeah, and then all of a sudden they were going down to Florida to the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl, and maybe they had some preference over Kentucky. There was some discussion about that. Regardless, I think the fact that Tennessee gets all this extra bowl prep, Jeremy Pruitt is beyond brutally honest about his roster and how young it is and how inexperienced. Now, the upperclassmen aren't top shelf SEC players. Well, given how much he relied in the last couple of months on these young guys, I think those extra practices for the Tennessee Volunteers will be huge. I don't think Tennessee's going to Atlanta next year to play in the SEC championship game. I still think they're behind Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, but I wouldn't be surprised if Tennessee's about a 9-win football team next year, given how many of their players return to Knoxville.
You appreciate golf terms as much as anybody, right? I think it's fair to say they had a couple double bogeys right off the bat of the season, starting 0-2.
Double bogeys? That was like a quadruple bogey.
It was not good. They had a couple of retees. They needed a couple of mulligans, but they finished strong, and here's the 18th hole for them. And the fact that they could get to 8 wins after starting 0-2 would be a great way to get back into the clubhouse leading into 2020.
Consider the fact that they were 1-4, and everybody in this building was saying, who's Tennessee's next football coach going to be?
Correct.
Instead, now Jeremy Pruitt's looking for an 8th win.
How about LSU now looking for another national title? Of course, national championship game is in New Orleans, but to get by or get there, they got to get by Oklahoma. First of all, were you shocked that they ended up being the 1 seed over Ohio State?
I was a little surprised at it. I don't have a problem with it. I think that you were splitting hairs between LSU, Ohio State, and Clemson. I think all three of those teams in